Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Art Basel Miami Beach Conversations. I am thrilled to introduce this talk, 21st Century Audiences, Complex Ideas we'll get into now, and our moderator, Arthur Cohen, who is CEO of LaPlaca Cohen in New York. Please join us in welcoming all the speakers. Thank you.
See if this works. Hi, everybody. Just waiting for our slides to come up. Are we good? Okay. Sorry, let's go back. Great. Hi and welcome. I am here with three friends, colleagues, and super smart people who have graciously agreed to spend some time with me and with you to talk about one of the most intriguing, sometimes vexing issues of modern directorship and the museum world in general, which is the rapidly changing nature of the audience of today and tomorrow. So if I can introduce them closest to me. First, we have Madeleine Grynsztejn, who is the wonderful director of the MCA Chicago, which if you have not been to, go there tomorrow or as soon as you leave here. And then on your way, kind of making a loop, you'll go to New York and see Lisa Phillips at the incredible new museum. And then finally, you can visit now, and then very soon you'll be able to visit even more of the extraordinary museum that is the MFA Houston with its director, Gary Tinterow, who's here as well. So let me just go through the structure of the discussion. I'll put everyone's names up. So what we're first going to do, because these guys have amazing stories to tell, so part of my job is to not get in the way of that happening. But what we've agreed to do is first to have each of the directors spend about 3 minutes or so going through a voiceover of a bunch of slides to just tell you about what's happening at their museum now, particularly as it relates to different initiatives to engage, connect with, and respond to, again, these changing audience needs. So after we have that kind of brief overview from the three directors, we're then going to look at 4 or 5 quick data slides that come out of a study we do called Culture Track that are meant to trigger questions about how each of the people here and their organizations are both interpreting and then potentially responding to some of the issues that surface when we talk to audiences about who they are and where they are now. So to begin the overview, I'm going to hand the mighty clicker to my friend Madeleine, who's going to tell us a little bit about the MCA Chicago.
Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you, Art Basel, for inviting me. Okay, 3 minutes, the MCA Chicago. Hi. This is a museum of contemporary art that was founded in 1967 as a Kunsthalle, as a non-collecting institution. And now 50 plus years on is very much a museum, a kind of grown-up museum. This is the DNA of the MCA. We have a vision statement that we follow through which we make all of our decisions. But at the heart of that is that we are artist-activated, audience-engaged 50-50. And what we mean by that, by contrast, is let's say you walked into the MCA in 1974 and you saw Chris Burden lying naked under a pane of glass and you didn't get it, we didn't care. But today we better care because audiences are very, very much our partners now. Museums have a success story. They're no longer the temples on the hill. They are the places that people want to not only go to, but also engage in and be a part of in a very, very, in a way that we communicate together. And in that spirit, and Arthur will talk about that in terms of Culture Track as well, audiences today think of all kinds of experiences as cultural, as well as artistic, as well as social. And museums would be wise to pay attention to that and to respond to that. And so in that spirit last year, and as part of our 50th anniversary, we undertook a renovation inside the extant envelope of the museum as a function as well of sustainability. And we put together, inside the envelope of the museum, a renovation of 12,000 square feet that is now free, and free all the time we're free all the time also for people under 18. And this renovation mashed up together the functions of art, learning, design, and food, driven by artist commissions, such as this Chris O'Feely in the upper image, his only permanent commission in the world in our restaurant Marisol, which was James Beard Award finalist and Bib Gourmet winner in the first year. Lower left, Pedro y Juana, a fantastic team out of Mexico City, former acolytes of Jorge Pardo, created a social engagement and civic engagement space called the Commons. And far right, we have, for example, a commission by the Brazilian artist Ernesto Neto. All of these things together mean that restaurants, so-called education spaces, which we now call learning zones and so on, these are not amenities, they are offerings and an intrinsic part of our program. So this is now the museum very, very much in use. This space in particular, Marisol took advantage of a really deadly boardroom and even deadlier classrooms. So the question was, well, then what happens to those spaces? This is an even deadlier atrium, and the ground floor of which had a sea of tables and chairs that constituted something like a cafe that was irritatingly foregrounded on my arrival. We took this space, which is catty corner to the art galleries. I made sure to take this photograph on the absolute worst day of the year. And instead, we brought in Sharon Johnston and Mark Lee, who just opened the Menil Drawing Center in Houston to enormous accolades. I expect them to be Pritzker Prize winners in a matter of years. They did our renovation with us, and they took away the restaurant and instead, as you can see on the first floor, created the Commons, this social engagement space, catty corner to the galleries, so that learning and looking at art happen absolutely commensurately. Inserted in seamlessly a third floor, because the cafe had been double height, and we turned that into our learning wing. And so in one fell swoop, without breaking the envelope, we had a learning and education wing in the middle of the building, which is not only architecturally smart, but also philosophically was a message we wanted to send. In particular, I want to focus on the Commons. This is a space that has its own vision statement. It is a space of artistic and civic exchange that welcomes Chicago communities. I want to focus for a minute on that. I think I'm in a minute and a half now. So why is it that we want to commit ourselves to this? We are a museum. We're not a social service center. We are not the World Wildlife Fund. We are a museum. We do our work. We contribute to society through the lens of art and culture. So looking at all the innumerable challenges that face us as a society, we made a decision to commit ourselves to 3 threads that we felt we were in the best position to move the conversation along. First, we nurture creativity with a critical mindset. Why did we commit ourselves to that? Because obviously museums champion creativity in all of its dimensions. We've also heard that instrumentalized language about creativity, that visual literacy, creativity, and imagination are 21st century skills. That is interesting and very important for us, especially as we build funds. And also because those are also the critical skills of artists, we're in the perfect position to have our knowledge worker society meet our artistic society. We're that platform. But also, and at the same time, the culture industry has seen explosive growth in the last half century. It is now the leading industry, which is why we call it the attention economy or the experience economy. It's a global economy. And it is, while culture was a place where you would, let's say, escape capital, it is now a central producer of capital. And we would be naive not to think about creativity critically, not to be not only a contributor to culture, but also an assessor of culture and a kind of productive and skeptical editor of culture. So where 21st century creativity is concerned, we encourage criticality. The second part of what we are committed to in this space and throughout the museum is a commitment to diversity and pluralism. In Chicago in particular, I don't need to tell you, it's a place of enormous urgency around race. A flashpoint for vivid issues around race, prejudice, and also this is taking place against the national backdrop of demographic shifts and a worldwide culture of global migration. All of that put together means that all of us have to commit ourselves to course correcting the primarily Euro-American canon that most museums, including the MCA, have been positioned to address all these years. Thirdly, We have a commitment to creating social common ground. We cannot underplay the social disruption that we're all living through today. Our society needs paths toward restoration and community, and we believe in this so much that we built this space in the middle of this building in order to be this thing.
I think we have
that
to move
thing.
I think we're going to move to Lisa now.
Okay.
Thanks, Madeleine. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I'll come back to that.
Okay, the New Museum's mission of new art and new ideas has always, from our inception 40 years ago, meant new experiences for audiences. People come to our museum for this, and our audience is one that wants to be challenged, engaged, and to encounter the unexpected. We show artists who are pushing the boundaries of art and redefining what art is, and in the process, we're redefining what a museum is. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, it has tremendous appeal to people who are open-minded and interested in actively exploring and participating in experimentation. Here are a few examples. This is a slide by Swedish artist Karsten Haller that cut through the museum, and where to participate, you really had to trust and take a leap of faith because you did not know where you were going to end up or where you were going. So you just put on the helmet and went down. Polish artist Paweł Altamer created this installation, Draftsman's Contract, which created a space for communal drawing. And over the course of many months, accumulated all of these drawings that the public and students contributed to, which in the end was cut up and given back to the public. This shows the work cut up and given back to the public. Or Pipilotti Riss's Pixel Forest, a two-dimensional image which was distributed in three-dimensional space, animated by the audience's movement through it. More recently, a Romanian artist, Alexandra Perici, used a life-size hologram, seen here, in concert with live dancers, or Simone Lee's Waiting Room, which drew on traditional African-American herbal remedies to soothe and heal the public. So if our hardware is the bricks and mortar, our software is the program, and we present many, many things and programs beyond the museum's walls that have expanded our audience tremendously. Our radical welcome does not only take place within the museum headquarters, but extends outward into the neighborhood, the city, and the world through programs like pictured here, Ideas City. It's a Future Cities initiative that was started in New York, where we had 150 civic and cultural partners, and they all collaborated with us. This is a mayor's panel taking place in Sarah Roosevelt Park on the Lower East Side. And this is more activities around Ideas City. Again, it's something we strongly believe in. We're advocating for the importance of culture to the vitality of the future city. And we believe museums have to do that. So it started out in New York, and here it is along the Bowery. Here it is inside of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Little Italy. And we've taken this initiative now, residencies, workshops, and conferences around the world. Here we see Istanbul, Sao Paulo, Athens, and Detroit. Along those lines, we have also had a long history of working at the intersection of art and tech for at least over 25 years. And we see our website as another platform for presenting art. We commission artists regularly to do new works on our website, where we have 2.1 million unique visitors every year compared to our 400,000 in real space visitors at our headquarters on the Bowery. And I should just, let's see if I can go back. That's a work by Taryn Simon and Aaron Swartz that we commissioned, Image Atlas. I urge you to look at that. We took this art and tech exploration further 5 years ago and opened an incubator for young makers and entrepreneurs working at the intersection of art and tech. And they're a very important part of our audience. It's really the young people that are incubating activities there and expanding the idea of what culture is a critical part of our audience, and one that we're learning from all the time. And here they are in the space working on VR and AI projects. This is Bina 48, the world's most sentient robot. Supposedly, artist Stephanie Dinkins, who was a resident at New Ink, has been working with her, and the robot also gave a lecture at the new museum. So I wonder, will this be the audience or docent of the future? Robots and AI are certainly going to reshape the future of work, of culture, and of the economy, so it's something we're really thinking about. Or will we always need these kinds of experiences, this is Karsten Haller's tranquility tank, to bring us back to our essential human nature? Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. That was terrific. I wonder if we have robot docents, will they still be able to complain?
Snap.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is the button to
Just
advance?
push the big button.
green one.
Yeah,
Okay,
just
great.
point it towards here.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So the question is 21st century audiences. Here we are well into the 21st century, and we have plenty of audience. But we are reshaping our program in order, basically go where we find people vote with their feet. And especially in the summer, we found that these immersive exhibitions that we've been running since I got there in 2012 have been very effective to bring in a multi-generational audience. So we started off with James Turrell. This is a posthumous work. It was designed before Soto died, but we had it realized after his death. And by the way, all these works that I'm showing you, we own. So we have a big summer presentation, but we own them, and we will be re-showing them in our 7,000 square foot Cullinan Hall with 28-foot high ceilings on a rotation. Shadow Monsters, which we bought as well. MoMA had shown it a few years previously. Kusama, we bought the beautiful room on the left, which will be installed in a new building opening in 2 years. And we borrowed another room by Kusama for the exhibition 2 summers ago. This will be familiar to Lisa. We bought it out of her exhibition at the new museum, and it was a great success with Houston audiences. Last summer, we had Mike and Doug Starn. I was the curator who invited the Starns in 2007 to make their big bamboo on the roof. It was the first big outdoor bamboo that they had done. They've done them all over the world now, and we had them come do something in Houston for us. Yeah. We're just now, against, and you'll hear some of these cultural track statistics, against a wider environment of declining museum attendance in some areas. We don't find that to be the case. Our attendance has actually grown by about 20% in the last 3 years. It's not something that we can bank on, but I wanted to also bring your attention to our statistics, our demographics, how we are closely tracking, we're not there yet with Hispanics, but closely tracking the demographics of Harris County. And by the way, Harris County, which is our county, which is one of the largest in the country in terms of population, it comprises 85% of our visitors. 91% of our visitors are Texans. Only 2% are foreigner. Compare that to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where every day 60% of their visitors are foreign. We have 2%. They have 60%. We have 91% local visitation, which means we're a very different kind of museum. We're like a parish church. We speak to our congregants every weekend. And in fact, our members comprise more than half of our yearly attendance, and they come many times a year. The attendance record, and it's sort of, here we are at Miami Basel, Contemporary Art. Ron Mueck was our most successful exhibition in terms of attendance ever in the history of our museum. It also, interestingly, had the fewest number of members visiting and the largest number of first-time visitors ever to our institution. They're not coming back. They're not loyal. They pick and choose as to what they want to see. It was an exhibition with only 12 works of art, but they were astounding. Another sort of disruptive fact is that we had more people visit our Winterhalter exhibition than our Mark Rothko exhibition. There's a beautiful Mark Rothko, very similar to the Bunny Mellon's Rothko, is hanging just inside the hall there. Just before we had a beautiful Mark Rothko retrospective, a similar show had been held in Munich. They had 150,000 visitors in 6 weeks. we didn't have 50,000 visitors in 15 weeks. This is the home of the Rothko Chapel. So my point here is that every audience and every community has different likes and dislikes and tastes and habits, and it's very difficult to generalize across the well. We're a largely female audience, 61%. You can see what our statistics in terms of youth versus age, and what our overall stats are in terms of reaching the demographic. We have a number of concerted outreach efforts which are now gaining traction. Since 2001, our International Center for the Arts of the Americas, a Latin American initiative, has just gained enormous traction with fantastic exhibitions, path-breaking exhibitions, and publications and research online. And we also have recently a Latino Art Advisory Council, which helps us as ambassadors to the community and advises us on the kind of programming that would attract them, but also to take our traditional programming, let's say an Impressionist exhibition, and how can we best communicate to a Latino audience in Houston about that. Similarly, and so here's some of our Latin initiatives. Adios Utopia, very much of interest in Miami here. This was the first exhibition of Cuban art to be held in the continental United States since 1959. Paint the Revolution came from Philadelphia, a great Mexican modernism exhibition. A path-breaking exhibition on the idea of home as represented in Latino and Latin American artists, which was at LaPlaca and in Houston last summer. We're also reaching out to our Asian community, really for the first time in our museum's history, with a great Korean exhibition, with a great Japanese exhibition, with a great mainland Chinese exhibition, but the works of art coming from Taipei, but these were all objects from the Forbidden City and the Chinese emperors. And so each time we reach out to one of these communities, we create task forces and support communities, and they act as ambassadors to bring their friends to our museum. Same thing with our great Indian exhibition that we had last spring, where we had support communities acting on our behalf to bring in the 150,000 Indians who live in the Houston community to our museum. Islamic initiative has also had tremendous success. It's only 10 years old, but again, about 150,000 Muslims in Houston, and they now find our museum to be one of the central sort of lodestars of their cultural experience in Houston. Another Islamic exhibition. We have an African American advisory committee, which is helping us in all sorts of domains. And I would say that African American art is that and Islamic art are the two prime initiatives these days in terms of recent acquisitions. We work with our hospitals in the world's largest medical center, and we are building new facilities to reach all these communities that we're touching sometimes for the first time with these recent programs, but we're rebuilding our 14-acre campus to be a hub for all things cultural. So that means new public plazas, new auditoria, a new cafeteria, what we hope will be Houston's best restaurant. We have just opened this spring our art school, which is, since we were founded as an art school in 1900, we've continued to have classes all these years, and we're still teaching art, unlike many other museums in the country. 2 years we'll be opening our Kinder building for modern and contemporary art, 150,000 square feet devoted to art of the last 100 years. And I think that's the end of my slides.
Great, thank you. So thanks for Gary.
Yeah.
And just so you caught that moment, I was just able to reclaim the controller from 3 directors. That's no mean feat. So believe it or not, that's all preamble, because it's important to kind of understand the things that are currently going on. As you notice in comprising this panel, we've got 3 very different typologies of museums. The Encyclopedic Museum, represented by Gary in Houston, the kind of Kunsthalle of the moment, very much focused on the contemporary world, with Lisa at the New Museum, and somewhere between the two, the MCA Chicago, which is very exhibition-driven, but also has a permanent collection, so is kind of straddling many different worlds. So quickly, as we now dive into kind of the guts of this, so our firm does the largest study in the world about the cultural consumer. We fielded a big one last year that statistically mirrors the US population. Over 4,000 people participated. And we learned a couple things, and some of the big highlights are the ones that I want to use as kind of trigger points for a discussion with my esteemed colleagues here. This is one of the ones that was referred to in two of the discussions that we heard earlier, particularly by Madeleine, which is the idea that when you ask the audience to define culture, you get a very different kind of set of examples. And again, the question is very specific. What is culture to you and what are you participating in? Not what do you find interesting, but what constitutes a cultural moment for you. So I'm going to start with Madeleine and just say, when you look at a chart like this, which beyond some of the obvious choices like historic museums and art and design museums, you see very high rankings for things like music festivals, street fairs, food and drink destination experiences. When you see this kind of expansive, audience-defined sense of what culture is to them now, how do you as a museum director kind of navigate through that and respond to it?
We do respond to it, which is why we built the expansion that we did. We recognize that audiences are coming to museums for a variety of reasons, but the number one reason I think that they go to museums is to be with each other. They use the museum in a sort of triangulation fashion to use it as a tool to be with the person they love, the person they want to love, and to create a connection, and also to use it. I think fundamentally museums are best used as kind of projective platforms to dress, rehearse, or test out new ways of thinking and doing and being. And it is in a way safer, if you will, to do that with someone that you trust or someone that you want to go on that journey with. And it doesn't happen just in front strictly of a work of art. There is, yes, that sense of wonder is absolutely the kernel of how we work. Everything we do is first through the lens of art and culture. But there are other ways in which people are interested in enjoying culture, and it's a kind of multi-sensual, multi-dimensional facet, and we want to respond to that.
Great. And Gary or Lisa, I don't know if there's any comments you want to make based on this in terms of what you're experiencing with this kind of broad-based definition of many different type of cultural moments.
We've found in the audience surveys that we've done that our audience puts a high priority on inspiration, that's really what they value over most things. So.
Right. So wherever it comes from. Great. So I'm going to go to this next slide. This is a slide usually that when we show and there's curators in the room, I have to dodge it because I sometimes get things thrown at me. So it's that top bar that has really caused the most discussion in this finding. The notion that there are many motivators, some of which are quite familiar to us in terms of what gets people to come to an exhibition, to an event, to attend a museum, or any other kind of cultural experience. But in this particular, let's call it socio-political moment, the country as a whole is telling us that one of the things they look for is cultural experiences as a way to make them feel better. That there is a lot of anxiety, uncertainty, dislocation, disagreement in the world, and sometimes, or perhaps for some people, primarily one of the things they seek out in a cultural experience is something that is other than that, not the circusification of it, but rather fun, meaning a place that is uplifting, transporting, perhaps escapist. The other thing I just want to point out before I go to Gary and just ask for an initial reaction as to whether this rings true to his experience, is that fourth number, feeling less stressed. In the 7 times we've done this study since 2001, that number increases every time. The utility of culture being a place that just helps us drop our shoulders a little bit in a world that otherwise doesn't give us many opportunities to do so. So Gary, when you look at these kind of emotional motivators that are in addition to and sometimes even above the traditionally defined ideas of self-betterment and education and enlightenment, what do you see?
Well, I see a question of semantics here, because what is having fun? And for some people, having fun is learning. And I would say for many people, and being inspired is also having fun. So I think, our typical definition of fun is, like fooling around in the backyard. I don't think that's what they mean when they say come to the museum. We've done a number of studies. I think we're in year 4 now of a in-depth study of engagement. So not just why do people come, but what happens when they do come to the museum, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and what can we do to facilitate that engagement. And we find there is no single answer. In fact, we've identified 4 or 5 subgroups of similar responses. And so there's, the safe explorers, there's the risk-taking explorers, and so we have 3 generational families that want a place so that the grandmother or father can bring the grandchild. That's one definite group.
Sure.
There's others who want to have a good time, possibly come with the people they want to love, and explore something new. So, I think, yes, all these answers obviously are what are accurate, but in each community, I think that there are different takes, and it very much has to do with the culture. In Houston, when I graduated high school in Houston years ago, Houston was 68% Anglo. It is now 34%
Wow.
Anglo. It was then 8% Hispanic. It is now 43% Hispanic. Those Hispanic families work as a unit. They're pods that are moving through space and time, and they want multi-generational activities. That's not the case of our Anglo visitors, for example.
Yeah.
So there are so many different factors to slice through here.
Right. And I'm curious, maybe with our other panelists, that fourth bar about wanting to not feel stressed, or a place that will make them feel less stressed, and the fact that keeps getting higher on this list. What do you guys see in that?
Well, we're certainly in a very stressful moment. It's undeniable in this country and the world. There's a lot of uncertainty and just a lot of stress. So people do come for refuge, they come for conversation, they come for cross-cultural learning. And increasingly, I think, with projects like Simone Lee's Waiting Room, which had tremendous response, they really are drawn to things around wellness and health, too. So I think we're going to see more of that.
And Madeleine, do you find that, or in your mind, does the museum have a different set of kind of social obligations these days than perhaps it once did, based on these kind of feelings?
Yeah, when I see feeling less stressed, what I see is the fraying of social bonds. And this is what we're really talking about, and why we're building what we're building and programming what we're programming. So for us, when we feel that we've done our job, even our civic job, which is not activism, it's not advocacy, it's a civic job, it's creating citizens. We feel like we've succeeded if you have walked into the MCA as an individual consumer, but you walk out having felt feeling part of a larger whole. And the way that you've done that is by connecting with an artwork that is made by someone else, or by connecting with someone who is speaking about something else, or by connecting with someone that you're with and you're both experiencing something. So this is why I think it's very, very important that and I'm very happy that museums are increasingly seen as convening spaces, and that they are in fact, convening spaces are the route to shared values. They are the route to community. You cannot get there without convening spaces. I mean, look at this public. It is what you need to get started as humans.
Yeah. It's interesting, we see this all the time when working with curators and directors, that there's a whole new set of skills that a staff has to now have that very few of them were trained for, in terms of really understanding and knowing how to thoughtfully respond to this civic role that has an almost visceral kind of emotional component. So these are really interesting and in some ways particularly challenging times.
I just want to add one thing, but each of us has a different kind of museum. Each museum and community has its own set of standards and goals. But there are core constituents. So while we're very much aware of these new audiences and new demographics and wanting to make a difference in the lives of whole new sets who previously did not feel welcome or find satisfaction in our institutions, and I think it's a tremendous and irreversible trend in museums. On the other hand, there is a core constituency. So when I talk about my members, those 50,000 people who come 4 to 5 times a year, they want their traditional films, art history lectures, traditional exhibitions, but which we now have Spanish language labels for.
Right.
So we can address both audiences at the same time.
That's a perfect setup for our next finding, which is specifically about this core constituency, and I'm going to ask Lisa to respond to first. So one of the surprising statistics we found that the frequent attendees, the core people that Gary are talking about, are actually the ones who are most eager to see something different. That one of the hardest things to do, particularly if you're a collections-based organization, is to create a sense of urgency. Because if you know the permanent collection, and you know that picture's in this gallery, and I turn left and it's in the center and it's always going to be there, I don't necessarily have to do anything. I know that it's there, which is not always the greatest thing. So 94% of frequent attendees say that they are more likely to stay away if the experience is seen as unchanging. So let's start with an organization that doesn't have that issue of permanent collection, but is always thinking about the moment, among other things, which is Lisa's. So what do you see in that, Lisa, and how do you guys experience it?
What's the question again?
Sorry. We need a question. The notion that people are constantly seeking novel experiences and that they can easily feel less than motivated if they don't think the experience is changing or different.
Yeah, I guess I don't see it so much as a need or desire for novelty, but a desire to be challenged and to encounter something outside of their normal frame of reference. It's not necessarily about novelty. And we've heard how much people respond to immersive experience, experiential art. This is not new. This has a 100-year history, but we may be entering the golden age of this kind of art right now because the interest of artists and the needs of audiences are converging. And this is really exciting. But it's not about museums looking for novelty. Okay. And I don't think.
Okay.
And I hope not.
Yeah, I'm curious.
But your museum is called the New Museum. It's not the old museum. And
let's hope they're looking for a little bit of novelty.
Yeah, right? and you're constantly changing and evolving.
We're 42 years new. Yeah. Yes.
You are.
Yeah, we're always changing and evolving because we're adapting to the current moment, and we're also looking into the future. We're always looking into the future.
Yeah. So Gary, how do you walk that line between that core audience wanting to see that picture every time they come in maybe the same place, and also this notion that the very same people need to be surprised, need new experience?
It's both, and so I hear quite a bit from my docents, from my members, my core constituency, the people who are really part of the fabric and family of the museum. They want change. They want to learn new things. And for example, as we go through cultures from Muslim to Buddhist to Hindu, they're very excited by these opportunities to learn something new and then to present that to a public. And I think that volunteers and docents are very much part of this ecosystem and can be motivated as a vehicle for change in helping interpret our content to new audiences. And that's where we have to constantly expand our venue.
So creating new experiences around familiar things or objects or galleries and things.
Precisely.
Yeah, great. Okay, so next, and we're going to go to Madeleine for this one. What we find when we ask people what the top things in their mind actually keep them from participating, it's this very top one that is particularly significant and potentially problematic, which is the notion of perceived exclusion. That the reason I won't participate is because I don't see someone like me there already. And I often, when we're talking about this to illustrate and make it more visceral, I tell people my Uber Lyft test, which is every time I'm traveling for work and I get in a Lyft to go to the cultural venue, I ask the driver if they've been there. And most of the time I get that. Well, that's not for me. Why would I go there? I mean, I know it's beautiful and everything, but they don't see that as a place that's open to them. And I know, Madeleine, in some of the examples that you gave us, there was a real intentionality about responding to that. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the important thing is that this cannot only be front of the house, this has to be back of the house. So you have to apply the principles of access, inclusion, and equity to your board, to your staff, and not just any longer to your program. Now, if you only go there, or if you go there first, which is where a lot of museums have been for many years, it will look cosmetic to the majority of your public. You have to walk this walk, and you have to do it now. And then think of other ways in which you can lower the hurdle of entry beyond admissions prices. I mean, Lisa mentioned this fabulous term, radical hospitality, which comes from Anna Deavere Smith, who's, just read her, see her on HBO. Truly one of the great thought leaders of our time. And by radical hospitality, I think we all mean that we have to, that every single one of our touch points, whether it's the web, how does a blind person access your website? Whether it's that door handle outside, whether it's the exhibition inside and its interpretive labels, Spanish, English, you have to constantly think about that, clearing those hurdles of access.
Yeah. I agree, but we really have to be future forward, you have to reflect the demographic shifts that are going on in the culture and also address a lot of persistent inequities that have just been going on for decades. And that means you can't have 4 white people having a conversation together. You know, that's not going to change things very fast. And that's a problem we really all have to work on.
Yep, good point. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, you're not wrong. So our final kind of piece of data, just to react to, has a lot to do with the new ways that people are actually experiencing culture and validating it through social media in particular. This is something we weren't looking for and didn't think it was a big deal until we saw how people reacted to it. And what we learned is that the younger the audience is that we asked basic questions of loyalty and affinity, like how do you demonstrate loyalty to a cultural organization that you care about? You know, traditionally it's been, well, I become a member, or I volunteer, or I'm a docent or something. Well, now about a third of younger generations say that when I give you a shout out on my Instagram feed, or on Twitter, or on Facebook, that I am making a statement of loyalty, the way I now define loyalty, which is a mind-bending piece of information for those of us who always saw that this word in this context equaled this. Again, when we ask the audience, we get a very different thing. So this is just a kind of general question for all or any of you about navigating through this incredibly rapidly changing landscape of people kind of validating cultural experience through social media. And some people even going so far as to say to us that until they have had the experience on their device and shared it, they haven't actually fully experienced it, that now becomes a defining aspect of the experience, which is probably not something we thought about as, you know, you guys were learning to be the people you are now. So how do you guys react to that?
So our core audience is young. It's 20 to 40-year-olds. Our staff is also 20 to 40 years old. So I'm learning from them all the time. This is a new way of communicating. It's a new way of connecting for people. It's replaced, in some ways, traditional criticism. I don't know. I mean, it's a form of validation. It's a way of connecting. But what I find most interesting is that it also telegraphs a new set of values that millennials have identified and that really they embrace, which is equity, participation, social impact, and they're really prioritizing that. It's largely very positive development, I find. And I just want to mention that there is a group at New Inc. called DIS. They also organize the Berlin Biennial, and they're working on something called edutainment. They have identified at least 80 new emerging identities, from organic farmers to student debt activists to microdosers to Etsy artisans to TED speakers. This is all part of this new community that we are paying attention to.
Great. Does anyone want to add to that? All right.
Yeah, I want to be the bummer in that group.
Okay, go ahead.
And that is to say that I still believe, and my team still believes in curatorial rigor as well as social engagement. And that sometimes you can go down a rabbit hole of self-preferential activities, and that may be part of the problem pertaining to the divided society. And one of the challenges that we have is that there is no absolutism. We do have to figure out shared values, but we have to figure out shared values, emphasis on the word shared, and with rigor. And that is not to police boundaries, not to police aesthetic boundaries. It's for all of us to become smarter, for all of us to have more self-determination, for all of us to become more productively skeptical.
Great, thank you. Let's go ahead, Gary.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with everything that Lisa and Madeleine have said, but I also want to say that as much as I recognize how digital communication has changed our lives, and in many instances for the better, sometimes for the worse, the fact is, for many museums in the world, attendance has never been greater. And attendance by young people has never been greater. And it's true that they may be on their phones the whole time while they're inside at an exhibition. They're there. and they're there to be with their friends and with their peers. So it's not an either-or situation. Yep. It's an and I think that we as museum professionals want to harness this extraordinary revolution to send our message to as many people as possible.
Good point. So with that, I think we have time for just a few questions, if there are any. The mics are on either side. There's one back here.
Hello? Yeah. My question was, how do you balance the more artist-activated type of art, which might be more conceptual or more context-dependent than other exhibits, basically more difficult for a lot of people, or more critical or political, with the more community-engaged stuff, or kind of experiential art, which is designed to kind of be more playful. How do each one of your institutions, respectively, try to strike that balance, and can you give any examples or anything for how you do that?
Madeleine?
We talk to the artist. Before we, when we shake hands with the artist, we follow the artist, and when we shake hands with the artist, we talk to them about how to layer in access and interpretation, how to layer in accessibility to the work. And we come to a meeting of minds as part of the understanding of whether or not we are well matched to have an exhibition together.
Any other responses to that, Lisa?
I would say that we have become more intentional about thinking about a balance of programs and making sure that we are integrating social impact residencies and projects every year into our program. So we're a lot more conscious than we used to be. And we're more intentional about integrating women and people of color and more diversity into the program too, because it's not just the audience and the staff and the trustees, but people want to see their realities reflected in the program, and it must be there on all levels.
Great.
So.
I think we had a question back there. Then. Yes, go ahead.
Keep it close.
Behind you? Thank you.
Hello, I'm from Mexico City, and I'm studying a master's degree, and my investigations go studying millennials, what changes does museums need to make to attract the attention of them and to be there with your phone and paying attention and being with your loves, like using that distraction. What would you say about the museums? Are they facing these changes? What are they doing in their narrative discourse to attract these young people?
I think we're all doing it, and I think we're doing it differently with different success rates, but each museum is facing the public, and that was not the case, say, 25 years ago. Museums were the preserves of professionals, and the absent contemporary art Kunsthalle, traditional museums in this country were professional preserves where art objects, were treasure houses, where art objects were studied and knowledge was produced for an elite. And now we are all facing our public, and everything starts and ends with our public. And we're using our collections in ways to provide opportunities to our audiences. So I think that's a fundamental shift in American museology, which is irreversible at this point.
I'd like to fold into that there's also the fact that our staffs are increasingly of a certain demographic, and they're demanding certain transparencies. I mean, just look at what's happening at the Whitney, for example, and by the way, the world is arriving at all of our doorsteps, and the staff of museums are also asking for us to pay attention to what they care about.
Great. I think we have a question over here.
So thank you for a very fascinating panel. The art fair comes to town. What happens to museums? How does it help you? How does it distract you? It takes us all by storm and drops the community like a hot potato. What would you like to change in this picture?
Any thoughts about the art fair?
I think the art fair has actually galvanized so much interest and attention around art. All the museums have stepped up, whether it's here or in London, where there are major art fairs. They're putting on their best shows, and people are going much higher numbers. So I think they work together.
It's a great opportunity, and I mean, not only are there educational opportunities such as our panel today, all the panels that you'll have here in the conversation series, but all of us have trustees and friends who are here looking at works of art. They're stimulated by what they see. They're in communication with museum professionals. So it's a marvelous opportunity for us to engage with our donors and our collectors in our communities.
Great. I think we have time for one last question.
Hi,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, you all.
Yeah.
Quick question. Considering just recently watched two white male directors swap San Francisco and New York, can you all talk about the initiatives you're doing to, I know, working very hard on bringing people of color into the museum field? If you could share some of your initiatives, because I know you three have done a great job on that. Thank you.
I want to show off. So we have four postgraduate curatorial fellowships that are specifically dedicated to diversifying the professional pipeline. One of them focused on the region of the Middle East, and three others focused on just diversifying the pipeline. And I'm very, very proud to say that the MCA is has among the most diverse curatorial staff in the country. And that is on purpose. That is not a mistake. And it is then reflected in the program.
And we have been a model of female leadership since our founding, and have taken that role really seriously and become much more intentional and focused on it in recent years. That include mentoring many people, women that have gone on to become directors, and we're extremely proud of that.
And similarly at our museum, whether it's the Board of Trustees, where in the last couple of years I think we have 4 new African-American trustees, probably a dozen Hispanic trustees on our board, to the second highest paid officer our institution is an African, and we have an enormous cadre of Latin American staff members, and we're pretty diversified sexually as you know, male, female, gender-wise. So we're making an effort. We're not there yet, and as we all know, it's not every person of color coming out of school has traditionally considered museology as a career path. But like MoCA and like Chicago, LA County, Atlanta, our museums have a number of minority internships. I think we now have 8 in our institution, where we hope to attract undergraduates, help them get into graduate school, and hire them back. And one of our graduates has already been hired by LA County Museum of Art in our minority internship program. So that's another way we can change the field.
You may be aware that museums, including ours, belong to an association called the American Association of Museum Directors. This is a very, very prominent topic among this association of 150 plus museums nationwide. And the thing that we have identified as the clearest hurdle of entry is paid internships. If you don't pay your interns, you're not going to diversify this pipeline, so pay your interns.
And we'll let that be the final note. Thank you all very much for attending.
Okay, great.